Lords Temporal, Lords Spiritual, other peers and members of the House of Commons as King Charles III. A third fanfare from the trumpeters and a gun salute in Hyde Park, and now the national anthem, God Save the King.
Cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip!
Hooray! Forget the Constitution, forget history, forget laws and great and good folk. That was a magic moment. The King's Guardsmen and the King's Royal Horse Artillery cheering the new King, unleashing their weapons in celebration of a peaceful and a seamless succession. These images, David Starkey, are genuinely magic.
Extraordinary. But what is wonderful, this is this notion of constitutional monarchy made literally flesh, blood, music, drama. And you were saying why I think it's so important that this be televised, but it equally needs explanation. We need, as it were, we've kept far too much under wraps. The whole budget business of monarchy draped in a veil of decorous mystery. It can stand exposure. There's nothing to be ashamed of. This is something to be profoundly proud of. The fact that we are virtually the only country in Europe, or one of a handful, never to have experienced dictatorship, to have experienced no violence of revolution, to have experienced neither the dominance of the extreme right or the extreme left. So much of it is due to this, that our 20th century was so utterly different, that we are not tormented in the way that virtually every other European country is by the memories of that century.
And David, you're right.
Esther.
I think that transparency, that understanding, that education, and it might make people understand why you need the royal family,
Precisely.
how important it is to the whole structure of the country, the democracy, the constitution, how it flows, whereas most people didn't understand that. They hear little snippets of information, and in this world of social media, you only have 140 digits or what have you, therefore you get it wrong. So I think what you're saying is right. And then there will be certain times where you do need that privacy, that secrecy, as it were, or that...
The oath of the Privy Council.
Exactly, and we were talking about that before, what can be revealed and what should be known and held precious as a secret. And I don't know if I've got time, I don't know if you're about to say something else, but at my last meeting with the Queen, she said something most profound and thoughtful, and this was about Operation Mincemeat, about this decoy that was done to foil and kid Hitler that helped us win the war. And she said, can people now keep a secret? How vital was it then to keep that secret of what was going on with the intelligence service so that we could win the war? But now could anybody do that? Because everybody wants to tell everything on social media. They want to expose everything. So there is a difference between what needs to be kept a secret and what can be revealed like this for greater understanding and for the greater good.
Philip, let me bring you in as well as we still enjoy those pictures from Hyde Park of the gun salute and the soldiers moving to the end of their duty and service there in Friary Court at St James's Palace. What's happening shortly is the first formal meeting of King Charles III with his Privy Council. We've seen them do the business and sign the oath and hear Penny Mordaunt and the rest of it. But although we are still in a period of mourning, that Privy Council meeting will still go ahead, and there is still the government of this great country to consider. And let's not forget for a moment, although much of this has raised spirits, however saddened we were by the death of the late Queen, folk out there are still worried about the cost of living crisis. They're still worried about what's going to happen when the bills go up. Government has to continue.
It does, and there'll be some important decisions to be made soon about what happens with Parliament, because Parliament now is suspended until 2 days after the funeral, so basically until the 21st of September. Now, actually, the conference recess was due to start from the 22nd of September onwards. And you're absolutely right, Alistair. There are certain things that the government have announced in terms of wanting to do a sort of a mini budget, certainly financial statement with stuff on energy. And the government will now have to find a time to actually introduce some of that stuff into Parliament. We were due to be off until the 17th of October, and I suspect we're going to have to change the timings of Parliament as a result of all this.
Esther, you know, held office and also having been a senior whip as well, but there are certain things that can be done by order of council. We're now looking at another part of the gun salute, and that's just in the shadow of Tower Bridge, which we kind of recognise because you could see the base of it. It would be nice to have had a wider shot, but we'll go as those things happen. We will dip in and out of them. But to go back to my point, you can do certain things by order of council. Government can still function in that sense. But if Liz Truss wants to have a new budget, an emergency budget, a financial event, that's a finance bill. That's the full legislation thing, which, as David pointed out, ends with King Charles III saying "Lorraine Laveau." I mean,
no. Le roi. You are caught out this time, Alistair.
Oh.
Le roi le veut.
Le roi.
Because
of course, that being the late Queen. That's 1-1. 3-1.
Titter, yes.
But those new bills are due to come in October.
And that is why, when Philip was talking there, you know, the government is in a little bit of flux at the moment. Where are you going to find the time on the floor of the House to get a vote, to see it through both houses, and then obviously royal seal of approval at the end? But when are we going to do that? Because not only is there the energy, money and budget and support that's got to come through, there's also the tax-cutting fiscal event that Liz Truss was talking so much about in those hustings, those ones that you were doing as well, Alistair, where she said, I want to reduce taxes and some taxes that were already to increase to stop.
Yeah. Just as the Royal Artillery filed out of Hyde Park, we've cut back now to these pictures, as I say, just in the shadow of... Actually, is that? I'm not sure that is Tower Bridge.
It is.
Is it Tower Bridge?
This is the instruction.
I thought that red and white sort of roundel thing there above the artilleryman's shoulder. It must be Tower Bridge. That's the only one.
It's the tower.
Right.
And the point is, in that enormous list of people who are told to do things, the Lieutenant of Her Majesty's Tower was instructed to do this. This again goes right back to the Tudor period. What we're seeing now was used to greet the coronation. You're very fond of Anne Boleyn. They did exactly this for the coronation of Anne Boleyn, through the great salutes from the Tower of London.
And interesting that, again, it's a little microcosm of how these things... Penny Mordaunt, a member of the Cabinet, declared within that statement that orders were issued to Ben Wallace, a politician, the Secretary of State for Defence, to instruct, and I think it's the Governor of the Tower of London, I know it's the Warden of Windsor Castle, and a very dear friend of mine, the late Peter Inge, Lord Inge, who was Defence staff, one of the last ones to hold the rank of Field Marshal, then retired with his lovely wife Tish to the Tower of London, and took those duties very seriously, not not least, who goes there? The keys. Whose keys? Now, the King's keys.
King's keys.
And look at that, magnificent. There's a certain poignancy to that because the late Queen Elizabeth II adored all of her regiments and all of her fighting men and women. But as anyone who knows any of her history will know, that she had a soft spot for the cavalry, but she also had a huge soft spot for the Royal Artillery. And I believe that the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery was a declaration by her, having visited their stables and billets in St John's Wood, and when her late father died, she declared that they would henceforth be known as the King's Troop Royal
It was
Horse
not change
Artillery.
their name. Otherwise, they'd change their name with each reign.
One of the points I want to pick up on, Alistair, you've said it a couple of times, and I think it needs, I think it deserves a more focus, is that you said that this was a peaceful transfer from one monarch to another and a transfer of power in a peaceful way. And I think we shouldn't understate that, to be perfectly honest. There's so many countries around the world that would look upon this with a huge amount of envy when they have such turbulent transfers of powers between regimes and things. We can sometimes, I think, take it for granted too much that we have this sort of peaceful.
But it was written
transfer
in
of
blood.
power.
David Starkey?
We only got there through blood and struggle and our own revolution. And this peace, this order, this extraordinary marriage of democracy, royalty and history is something that is precious and it's fragile. And we take, as you were saying, absolutely, Philip, we take it for granted and we shouldn't.
No, I'm going
shouldn't.
to butt in only because it's one of those television technical things that we've only got a couple of minutes on the line that is booked. We're going to bring in Mark White, who is our Security and Home Affairs correspondent. Mark.
Well, Alistair, apologies for the delay on the line for a start. It's going up on the satellite, and by the time it gets all the way back to you, there's a bit of a delay. But yes, the crowds are here in great numbers today, and much more orderly than the last couple of days because they put barriers really around this area at the front of Buckingham Palace and all the way up the Mall now. This huge infrastructure that we expect to take place, to be put into place over the coming days, now really starting to take shape as everybody catches up with the well-ordered plans that have been such a long time in preparation. Now, of course, we've been listening to the gun salute there. Those lucky enough were outside St James's Palace to listen to the proclamation, and they will now be able to go into St James's Palace to that area to read the proclamation for themselves.
And we've just split the screen with Buckingham Palace behind you, and to the right, pictures of actually a tree at the moment that we're just panning to the left from St James's Palace. And as it were, if you stuck your left arm up and pointed sort of slightly to the right, then that is where St James's Palace is, just down the Mall on the left, and the proximity, and Clarence House where King Charles III used to live and the Queen Mum before him, they're all there. It is a huge concentration of royal residences, but also the headquarters of the Commonwealth just in front of you as well. A top shot there of old London and new London in the background. Mark, thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to you later on. As Mark was saying, orderly crowds still gathering outside Buckingham Palace, but the focus of attention this morning very much at St James's Palace, just round the corner from there. Philip raised a really, really important point that we're going to talk about for a few moments now, just before we went down to Mark at Buckingham Palace, and that was my point about the peaceful transition. The number of European monarchies that can trace their blood, heritage and lineage back to Queen Victoria as well, who are no more, toppled, and some of them brutally, not least in basements in Ekaterinburg.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think we take these things for granted. But I think there'll be lots of people around the world watching this today. We should be immensely proud of this transition, of the ceremony, the history that goes with it. And I think probably there'll be lots of people around the world who may well be even more proud of what we do than we are ourselves.
What's the Conservative answer to Putin's point that the election of your new leader was not frightfully democratic? Hang on a minute.
In what regard? That we have rules that we abide to, and therefore we...
No, I know what... I just thought it was... I mean, it was classic, cheeky Putin, but it wasn't a completely silly point.
Well, in regard to, I suppose, if you want to make a cheap jibe, and they are not following how it works, as we have, as we said, this smooth transition of power. We have that within parties as well. You'll be keeping to the manifesto of 2019. You'll be changing leader, and that was something that was voted on by the members as well. So I think we have clear guidelines. I think we have a path that we follow. And I was writing some words down there, and I think we are great pragmatists. I think we're looking to survival, whether that's political parties or whether that is the royalty there, and therefore it's how do we live together peacefully. And I think we are a country that follows logic more than emotion, and I think it is this logic, I know David is gasping there and maybe we're moving to emotion, but this logic of survival, pragmatism, as you said, it started from blood and turmoil, but now we've learned from that, and we said, how do we move smoothly on and sign it through?
But logic is a terribly dangerous thing. Logic drove the French Revolution. What we're seeing here is something very different. We're seeing change which has to be rooted almost literally in the soil. Prince Charles's interest in ecology, there's a kind of political ecology. Good plants grow in good soil. What we should really be doing, and I'm going to plug my own subject, this is an absolute classic illustration of the fact we need to teach the history of this country properly, clearly, and without party, in that sense, without party division.
Sure.
Because both parties derive from it, both parties, all parties have grown from it, and all parties depend upon it.
Can we go back, talking to the director now, to that's Windsor Castle. Can we go back to that picture that had Big Ben Tower and the... We can't. Oh, well... this is a separate feed, but there we are. It says Buckingham Palace, but
No, this is the tower.
That's what that's the tower with the beefeaters.
Yes.
Do they mind being called beefeaters?
Well, they shouldn't really
Yeomen
be.
of the Guard.
They're yeomen of the guard. They are the original Tudor Guard. They're founded by Henry VII. They're wearing their dress uniforms, which were altered by Henry VIII. Originally they were green and white, and they're made red and gold by Henry VIII.
And the other ones that fascinate me, are they called the Gentlemen at Arms that go back to Henry VII?
No.
Which is the oldest bodyguard?
The yeomen of the guard are the oldest. The gentlemen pensioners are created by Henry VIII in 1540, but they too have their roots. Do you know what? They have their roots in Henry VIII's first summer holiday as Prince of Wales when he goes to court in 1504, and his father gives him a group of little toy soldiers to play with, and that's the origin of the gentlemen pensioners, who are now even older than the Queen. Watching a procession of gentlemen pensioners is kind of, you can sense the arthritis with each movement of the march.
Also the search of the basement of the Palace of Westminster before the state opening of Parliament.
But that's by this lot. That's by the yeomen.
Again, just to make sure that everybody remembers the merits of peaceful transition rather than Guy Fawkes. I'm going to put to all three of you as well. The reason I asked the director if we could go back to that picture that we can't, it was just a lovely wide shot that folk at home may recall. Let me conjure it up for you if you don't recall it. To the left of the frame was the tower at the eastern end of the Palace of Westminster, with Big Ben, the bell, within it. And at the other end were the twin towers of Westminster Abbey. That relationship between democratic government and Parliament and the Church, Westminster Abbey, a royal peculiar, the royal family's church. That matters as well. Does it matter within Parliament, Philip?
No, it very much matters, and obviously the appointment of the Speaker's chaplain as well, which is an important part of the life in the House of Commons, is also an integral part of that, and their appointment as well. So no, it is, all of these traditions are very, very important. It actually comes back to David's point, which I very much endorse, about how we should be much better in this country at teaching history. They're obsessed with it in the United States, teaching kids there about their constitution. Even young kids will know everything about the US Constitution, which doesn't happen in this country. And I think there's a lot to be said for having some factual information about our
A
constitution.
kind of it would have to be called royalists rather than civics, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But you know, it is just trying to get what we've been seeing now on the ground into people's heads, and to understand that far from there being a contradiction between monarchy and democracy, monarchy in a fundamental way is actually its guarantor in this country.
I will add something in there, adding to sort of the process and the procedures and the histories of things. I remember when people were saying, oh, now we're all online, why don't we vote online? Why do you go through, the voting lobby and spend all that time there? And how important that is, because it's the only time you could get to meet secretaries of state, the prime minister, the chancellor. So if you got rid of that and moved online, that's when actually you'd lose this contact with people you might want to lobby. So people come into Parliament, never been there before, think they've got better, quicker ways of doing things, and actually you miss out on the essence of being there and
also,
what you should be doing.
You are the oldest parliamentary assembly still functioning properly in the world. Aren't you proud of the fact? Of course you are. And again, these things are not empty symbols.
Yeah.
They all have a function. They're part of this continuity. Yeah. As I said, history isn't a dead thing.
No.
What we're looking at now, it's something that continues growing and developing.
And you understand the purpose.
The late great Sir Alistair Burnet always said with history, if you don't know where you've been, how on earth can you speculate about where you're going? And
Precisely.
I thought that was a great point. The other thing, and you and I talked about this yesterday, Esther, is we've just witnessed this morning truly historic televising of certain oaths being taken, particularly about Scotland and elsewhere, that great constitutional transition of power. Esther was saying yesterday as well that when we come to the coronation, and no date is set for that yet, we know the date of the funeral of the late Queen, but the coronation will come, and at that point, as it were, the constitutionality of this great country of ours collides with its faith and its belief in God and the officialdom of the Anglican Church, because those are oaths taken before God.
But they're oaths. They're also oaths to obey the laws as passed by Parliament. I mean, the monarch doesn't swear simply to God. He swears to his people, and this is the peculiar. This goes right back to the beginning of almost to the beginning of the English monarchy. Whereas in France, when the king, and again there was the French was the greatest of the West European monarchs. Of course, the king swore an oath at his coronation, but he swore an oath only to his crown and to protect the rights of the crown. The English kings swore an oath first to the laws of St. Edward, and then the laws made by the people, and then the laws made by the people in Parliament. So in a sense, we have been a kind of royal republic going back to the Middle Ages. You see, we get the process of democracy wrong. Democracy is only the very, very last layer in the cake. The important thing is the idea of responsible, stable, legally bound government.
I think it was extraordinary as well yesterday when the President of the French Republic, underlining the last word, said, you've lost a queen, we called her the Queen. And there he is, the leader of a republic which settled certain differences with monarchy a little while ago, more violently perhaps than anybody else.
But he's also the leader of the Fifth Republic. And before that, since the French Revolution, there were two monarchies and there were two empires. So France, in the last 200 years, has had 9 unstable regimes.
We're now looking at the great and the good of the City of London, that distinction that we were making in our conversations and commentaries earlier, as preparations are made for the declaration. I think it's the Royal Exchange.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Found under Elizabeth.
This is strange. I mean, I love the Guildhall, one of my favourite buildings in London, where the hustings used to be way back, sort of 13th, 14th century.
Oh, right through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where Queen Mary, when she was Queen Mary the First, Bloody Mary, when she was protecting her throne against the rebellion against Wyatt's revolt, she actually addresses the citizens from the hustings, and effectively it's monarchy by election. in the Guildhall, effectively monarchy by election, even then, even in the middle of the 16th century.
And another extraordinary thing about it is it's called the Guildhall because it was the monopolies, if you will, of the old days, where the crown would grant, whether it would be to silk traders or spice traders or what have you, and that led to the creation of the great livery companies. This line of men and women are the heirs and successors to that lot, and they are aldermen and they are liverymen and they elect the mayor, the
Lord Mayor of London.
Real power, and talk about anachronism, blimey, makes Parliament look thoroughly modern.
No. They arise at roughly the same. For heaven's sake, don't you realise Parliament goes back to the reign of Edward I? Parliament is already in effectively modern guise by the reign of Edward III in the 14th century. Peers wear recognisably the same dress that they do now. I mean, so all of these things are products of the Middle Ages. This is why Esther and Philip inhabit a pseudo-medieval building. The fact that the Palace of Westminster is built in the Gothic style is saying our freedom isn't the result of a Bill of Rights, it's not the result of a written constitution, it's the result of our history. It's the result of the accumulated wisdom of the ages. And this
men and women who run the Corporation of the City of London now going up the steps and getting themselves all lined up there, and I believe that is the Royal Exchange, and there will be a proclamation there. One of the other, I love Pugin as an architect, and that goes back again to after the Great Fire in the 1830s, and the creation of that pseudo-Gothic establishment. There was a glorious debate and row within the establishment then about whether Pugin, who was the kind of radical, free-thinking spirit of architecture in those days, should design the building.
No.
Charles Gray.
Sorry, you're wrong. Pugin does the decorations. The building is designed by Barry.
David Starkey.
Sorry, Alistair.
No, David Starkey. There was if you read the history, David,
I have read it, and I know it.
There was an initial debate whether it should go to Pugin or should go to Charles Gray. It went to Gray, and that was partly the decision of a committee chaired by Prince Albert. And it was decided to let him off the hook and keep him happy, that Pugin would get to do the coat hooks and the tiles and the little bits and pieces.
Philip,
initially, he was in the running to design the whole building.
But can I just explain?
Can I just say one thing? You might think Philip and I are an old married couple, but can I tell you, David, Alistair, you're an old married couple. I tell you, but they love each other. Carry on.
This is the more formal uniform here we're now seeing close up. Excellent, of the aldermen and the liverymen and women as well, as they go in there to take their places. As I say, they will be people who run the guilds of the City of London. And they do hold real political power, but only in that neck of the woods.
I wanted also to go back to your imagery of Big Ben and the Elizabeth Tower and Parliament and Westminster Abbey, because one thing I wanted to point out is the chapel in Westminster Abbey, the Westminster Hall in Parliament that Esther and I were lucky enough to get married in, is actually under the auspices of Westminster Abbey, and you have to get permission from Westminster.
This is St Stephen's Chapel. You lot, of course, are simply benefiting from the fact that Henry VIII and Edward confiscated the lands of the church, and the reason for the shape of the Commons Chamber is originally it was a chapel. It was St Stephen's Chapel, and where you were married is the crypt of St Stephen's Chapel, and above that there was the pre-fire House of Commons. But just going back to so Alistair and I can kiss and make up. The great debate that Alistair's referring to is the debate as to which style the new Parliament should be built in, and the decision was taken that no building built in the classical style was to be allowed. It had to be Gothic. It had to be this echo of the medieval history. And if you go to Canada, you will see exactly the same. The Canadian Parliament in Ottawa, for just the same reason, whereas in America, of course, because you're saying this is new, this is enlightened, this is pseudo-French, although it really wasn't, you have the capital deliberately modelled on Rome, and the idea of a republic, again, modelled on Rome, although, again, the reality of the American Constitution is a very lightly moderated version of 18th century England, which is why they even have a sergeant at arms running the House of Representatives and a speaker in charge of it.
All of this that you're explaining again here are like the layers and layers of the Constitution as it builds, and as you say, it's got a history, but obviously that adds to the future, and I think that adds to the richness of our Constitution, all of these layers. And what you also see when the Queen is working with politicians, how much stronger that is. So if you ever go to a G7, a G5, a G20, if the Queen is there, who is everybody looking to? All these world leaders always want to stand next to our Queen. Therefore, she is the ultimate diplomat. And he now, Charles III, will be too, and how important that is for us all.
If you're just joining us, it's just gone 11:30, and you're watching and listening to GB News TV and radio, and where we are taking you now, by means of these pictures, is to the heart of the City of London, the Royal Exchange, where there will be a proclamation confirming the accession to the throne of King Charles III. And earlier we had the Privy Council going through exactly that same procedure, but it is now going to be done in the City of London, and we're just glancing to the top of the old BT Tower there, celebrating the life and times of the late Queen, as we wait for the proclamation in the City of London of King Charles III's reign, and that is St James's Palace, where we were earlier with the Privy Council when Penny Mordaunt presided over matters and the declaration was made there. Let's take you back now to the City of London, if we can.
Order! Your fight! Collections! And jacks! Inward! Face! Stand at your ease! Stand easy! Collections, come out and dress! One more slap back.
There are these moments on live television which one loves but also one fears, and that is waiting, not for Godot, but waiting for whatever happens next in the procedures. We saw the lovely procession of guardsmen and the band there to the area just outside the Royal Exchange. And you're literally moments there away from the Mansion House where the Lord Mayor of London lives, and also the Bank of England, who interestingly yesterday delayed the meeting of the Monetary and Policy Committee that since Gordon Brown and Ed Bull's independence sets the rate of interest, with huge expectations that rates are yet going to rise again, and now the other people now process towards these events, and I'm open to correction by my lovely friends here in the studio, Philip and Esther, and also David Starkey. But I think we're still in the company of the great and the good, exclusively of the city. The politicians, the Privy Council, your lot, as it were, Philip and Esther, they've had their moment. Yeah. This is now the City of London.
Absolutely.
I think one thing to note, Alice, about all these things, and I think this is where David again is right, is that all this isn't just sort of pointless tradition. There's all our traditions. There's a purpose behind them, and people who want to come along and change our traditions ought to sometimes think about that.
I mean, what it underscores again is that in the old royal procession, we now see the procession simply before a coronation going around.
Tell me who those are in their red tunics and those...
That is the Honourable Artillery Company. That's the Honourable Artillery Company, and they have their headquarters in the city, and it's the equivalent, really, of the kind of home guard of the city.
Yeah.
But again, with incredible prestige going back to the reign of Henry VIII, but they're effectively in Civil War uniform. In other words, those particular breastplates and whatever.
And I know the headquarters because they're the Royal Honourable Artillery Company, very generous to various charities, and
they are indeed.
A great hall there.
They are indeed.
One or two things. So we've cut away from the city just for a moment. You don't need me to tell you that we're now looking at Buckingham Palace again, but you will notice that the flag is returned to full mast.
To go back to the city.
Here we are. Indeed we are, David.
To go back to the city, the old coronation procession used to begin at the Tower of London. The monarch always spent the night at the Tower of London before the coronation procession, and then the procession went from the Tower of London to the Palace of Westminster. They then stayed there overnight before the coronation, actually in the Abbey of Westminster. But Philip, it's how our history is constantly reinvented. The towers of Westminster Abbey, do you know how old they are?
No.
Just the beginning of the 18th century. They are and do you know what? Even at the beginning of the 18th century, they add them in the Gothic style. The Abbey is not finished until the beginning of the 18th century, self-consciously, again, in the Gothic style. This is the end of the Lord Mayor.
I'm just observing, again, lovely imagery there, but yet another part of the state, the Metropolitan Police there. The City of London has its own police force as well, but so lovely to see mounted police officers there escorting and again, to be clear, these are not pursuivants and heralds, as we talked earlier. These are royal trumpeters, and they are pressed into action, and they will perform shortly. Because they will precede, of course, the declaration of the proclamation of the reign of King Charles III. And there they are, marching splendidly. Goodly crowd there, top of the picture there, gathering against, tucked in neatly behind the fences. The other thing, we were talking about peaceful transitions of power and what have you. There have been moments, and I mentioned it yesterday, after one Trooping the Colour, where somebody had a gun in the crowd and the late Queen was on Burmese and didn't bat an eyelid and just rolled on. We can turn out in huge numbers in this country, peacefully, constructively, and celebratory. That's worth a celebration in its own right.
It is, but you know, again, it's fragile. I mean, it depends on another contract. It depends on the contract. We're a disarmed people, therefore we need protecting. We need a police force to protect us. And that contract, I'm afraid, is being nibbled at the margins. You know, all forms of surrender of authority are forms of contract. There are two sides to the bargain. We saw it very clearly with the King surrendering the Crown estates in return for. We give up our weapons in return for protection and in return for the protection of our property. And if that isn't delivered...
And good governance.
Trumpeters in line. If there was to be a moment of stress, to have the coinciding of the death of a monarch and the succession of a new monarch and the defenestration of a prime minister and the election of a new prime minister, rare, tricky moment.
Astonishing, unprecedented.
But also a refreshness and a new beginning as well. And I think we've been through a lot in this country of late. People talk about Brexit, they'll talk about COVID, they'll talk about lockdown. And there was an element of rebirth at the moment. And I'm wondering if we all need that in one way or another as well. So yes, a precarious, tricky moment, but something so refreshing and brand new about it as well.
But
I need to bring Philip in. I'm just letting folk at home enjoy these pictures as they get ready to do their...
You see the Civil War uniform?
Yeah,
you can see it very clearly.
Something knot. Sealed knots.
Sealed knots, yes. Except these are the real thing. But of course, they'll be perfectly decent chartered accountants in real life.
You were talking a moment ago about peaceful transitions and what have you, and the degree to which in that remarkably moving address that King Charles III gave last night, there was the hand of peace and the hand of reassurance. He's been around long enough. He's been waiting 70 odd years to accede to the throne, which we've witnessed being confirmed today. He's seen it all and been there. He senses exactly that fragility, I would suggest, that David Starkey and Esther were just talking about.
That's right. No, I thought it was an excellent, absolutely fantastic, first-class broadcast last night from the new king. And yes, I mean, I think there were people who questioned the future of the royal family after the Queen died and whether or not it would be able to survive under the new regime. But I think Charles will have reassured an awful lot of people who were questioning that with the way he's started out with his message last night. And I think it is reassuring for us all. I think it is important that we've got a brand new Prime Minister, a brand new King. Well, the King's had years and years and years to learn from his mother, and I think we should all be reassured by that he's got a lot of that experience already under his belt.
And you know what I was reassured by, and I think the King was too, when he came out and did that impromptu walk in front of Buckingham Palace, how warmly he was received.
Do you know what you were seeing? You were seeing the invention of a new royal tradition. From this point onwards, there will be the first walkabout in front of the... Because this is how tradition happens. It layers, it rolls. And it was also, the whole thing was a kind of reabsorption of Princess Diana into the history of the monarchy, because those, at first, those great mountains of flowers were a kind of act of rebellion.
There was another
Diana's
great
death.
tradition which was breached quite remarkably, and that was... apart from shaking hands, if you're so invited to,
kissing him on the cheek.
Kissing on the cheek. And the woman was widely interviewed afterwards, and it was clearly the moment of her life, bless her. But that was...
It would be nice for them to view Prince...
that, as opposed to taking flowers, thank you very much.
Yes. There was an extraordinary intimacy.
Now, interestingly, I thought the lady who kissed him on the hand was far more deferential than kissing him on the cheek, and I thought when she explained why she did that and how that came about, I thought that was a much more poignant picture. I thought that going back to a time of deferential where really we're not like that at all anymore.
I thought the King, though, was visibly touched, wasn't he, by the reception that he received outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. He was visibly touched.
Well, the other thing that he knows very clearly, whether it's his position on the faiths in plural or climate change, I mean, he has in the past taken positions that have not been universally popular out amongst his subjects. So, as we were saying just a moment ago, he knows that to a degree the jury was out, but I think that clinched the deal last night outside Buckingham
and
Palace.
with Camilla too, because people questioned.
Yes,
but again, but look again how completely the Queen devoted herself to making sure the succession was smooth. She went out of her way to endorse Charles as head of the Commonwealth, and she went out of her way to say Camilla must be Queen. Everybody said the Queen was devoted to her duty, devoted to the country. Fundamentally, she was devoted to the idea of monarchy and making sure that it
Walker is down at St James's for us while we look down there on the great and the good of the City of London, awaiting their proclamation. Cameron, we were almost jaw-dropped here watching Penny Mordaunt and all the Privy Councillors go about their business. What is the feeling there, folk that you've spoken to, how it went, and for ordinary citizens to have seen the actual proclamation there from the balcony?
Well, it's certainly a historical moment here, Alice. So it's incredible seeing the crowd, which is still gathered here, waiting to try and have just a small glimpse of His Majesty the King as he emerges from St James's Palace. There was a false alarm about 5 or 10 minutes ago where a car which looked like it could have been King's car, but it was actually, I understand, perhaps a Guardsman of Arms on his way to the Royal Exchange to read out the principal proclamation for the second time. We could actually hear, I'm around the front of St James's Palace, just around the corner from Friar Court. I'm on the corner of St James's Street, if you know London, and Pall Mall. And we could actually hear the Guards King of Arms read out that principal proclamation. There were shouts of God Save the King all throughout the crowd here. There was applause, and there was also 3 cheers for His Majesty the King. And as the ceremony was taking place, as the Session Council flag started to raise to full mast here on the streets of London, then they will remain at full mast until after the principal proclamation has been read out in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland at midday tomorrow. and then an hour later they will return to half-mast on Her Majesty the Queen.
Cameron, we're looking still at pictures here, and folk who are kind enough to join us on GB News TV and radio. A goodly crowd, not only of the great and the good, but just ordinary folk who've taken time off this Saturday morning to witness these extraordinary events unfolding before us across the capital, and of course later on in the capitals of the nations of Scotland and Wales as well. A goodly crowd we saw on television where you were. What was the buzz amongst the crowd who'd made that journey to St James's Palace to see these unique events unfold?
It's one of extreme excitement, I would say, Alistair, and you're saying it's unique events, and I think that just shows by speaking to people in the crowd here, the distance some people have travelled. I was speaking to one lady earlier, and she'd actually travelled from Shrewsbury, come down to London specifically to come and watch this historic event unfold here at St James's Palace this morning. I spoke to somebody else. It also booked a hotel room for a day in kind of 10 days' time on hope that Her Majesty the Queen's funeral was for the day after, because they are very much prepared to kind of camp out on the Mall in order to pay respect for Her Majesty's coffin. But I think there's definitely a dynamic and a contrast, Alistair, between 2 days ago and now. 2 days ago, we knew that Her Majesty was ill, and there was a lot of melancholy in the country. But here, standing in the crowd, the atmosphere seems to be one of celebration for a new king, and happiness to still mourn Her Majesty the Queen.
And finally, Cameron, it is you touch upon a very sensitive issue, but one that's really informed all of our conversations yesterday and today. King Charles III, when he opened his address just about an hour ago to the Privy Council, uttered the words, "It is my sorrowful duty to announce to this council," something that they obviously knew, and that was that his mother had died, and that he was, by dint of that fact, the new king. But he is a man of an age who has lost his mother, and he spoke very movingly about the debt they owed to her, both his brothers and sister, the Princess Royal. He is king, he was Prince of Wales, he has lost his mum, he is a man in mourning.
It's no responsibility for him, isn't it, Alistair? He wants to grieve, perhaps as a private citizen, but duty always comes first, and he knows that he has now devoted his life to the duty and to serve his people in the United Kingdom. But he touched upon, didn't he, Alistair, in St James's Palace a little earlier, that he will rely upon, and I quote, "the constant support of my beloved wife, Camilla, the Queen Consort." And I think it's her presence and her support that will help him through this difficult time as he tries to balance public duty and his personal feelings towards the loss of his mother.
Cameron Walker, live for us there at St James's Palace. Thank you. Keep in touch, and we'll touch base with you. And I suspect you'll be moving around to Buckingham Palace ere long as well. But good to talk to you as always, and thank you very much indeed for that. Cameron Walker there. We're talking a little bit about the crowds there, and as we look at that nice wide shot of the Royal Exchange awaiting the proclamation there for the Corporation of the City of London. To all three of you, the fact that folk do turn out, be it outside St James's, be it down in the city or in huge numbers outside Buckingham Palace, actually matters as well. They don't have to. No. As David said, they're not pressed in.
No, it goes to show the enduring love that the people of this country have for the monarchy, and I think that as King Charles found out yesterday when he got back to Buckingham Palace, and I think he's been touched. It must be helping him get through what must be a terrible time for him. He's trying to grieve for his mother, but he's got to do all of this duty. I think again we shouldn't underestimate how difficult that must be for him at this particular time. But, you know, the support that he's getting and that the monarchy as an institution gets from the public, you know, is always overwhelming, and it seems to be overwhelming for him too.
And if we could look back to the 2019 election and Boris's huge victory with 80 seats, a lot of that was down to that he was very patriotic, the fact that he, you know, loved the royal family, in stark contrast at the time to what was seen in the Labour Party and what had happened with Jeremy Corbyn. So we are a country that appreciates our royalty. But I think it'll be...
Events begin at the Royal Exchange.
Company of pikemen and musketeers! Have a care! Battle James! Battle James! 10!
dramatic change is the fact that the relationship between the monarchy and Parliament shifts with the Glorious Revolution. And at the coronation that followed the Glorious Revolution of William and Mary, UMPs actually took over a very large chunk of the Abbey. They had to construct a special balcony in which the entire House of Commons was placed as a symbol of the new relationship between Crown and Parliament. But this, the heralds, the fact that the kings of arms are actually carrying their rods of office, the tabards of the heralds, nothing has changed at all. The uniforms have got an 18th century overlay, generally speaking, and the ceremonies tend to get elaborated more and more in the 19th century and the very beginning of the 20th century. I mean, the kind of monarchy that we have now is very much a creation of the period of Edward VII and George V. That's the period where the texture really becomes very clear. And of course, it's the moment at which we develop the practice of, we've all been patting ourselves on the back and saying, don't we do this well? We didn't before the beginning of the 20th century.
Victoria's procession there.
That's right. He's got the mace and the sword bearer. The sword bearer. The man with the funny hat is the sword bearer.
They've all got a funny hat from what I can see.
Yeah. There are lots of funny hats, but the one with the enormous fur hat, the fur hat is the actual sword bearer.
Funny hat has just become a technical expression.
Well, That's right. Is it?
There are degrees of funny hats and wigs as well.
Yes.
So the ceremony, as you say, has got more sort of prestigious, more opulent.
And also much more precise and rehearsed. They did the whole of Victoria's coronation without a single rehearsal. The Archbishop of Canterbury who was blind as a bat, began reading upside down and put the ring, which was too small, on the wrong finger. And Victoria had agonies trying to get it on.
And this is what people talk about. It is the envy of the world. This, the style.
Now look at the size of the proclamation. That huge sheet that's in front of him.
And that is Garter, King of Arms again. Having done it at St James's Palace, he's now doing it at the Baltic Exchange.
The Royal Exchange.
Royal Exchange.
But again, the same symbol of office, the mace, which you have, it's one of the universal symbols of office, but it always has the crown.
And fascinating, because again, immediately rushing back, and I will shut up the minute Garter, King of Arms starts, but the famous scene of Michael Heseltine getting frightfully cross with the Labour opposition at the Scott Nats and seizing the mace.
Which points
and also Oliver Cromwell.
That's right. Which point the power of the Commons goes. But the mace is the symbol, but it's delegated royal authority, which is why it's got the crown on.
The sword being, if you don't get my point with the mace, you'll get my point with the sword.
That is because the Lord Mayor exercised justice within the City of London. The crown does not go into the City of London without, in a sense, permission. It has extraordinary privileges.
Which is the extra piece force there as well.
John MacDonald waved the mace in Parliament as well. It wasn't just Michael Heseltine. John MacDonald did it when I was there.
Did he?
Over Heathrow. He was appalled by the Labour government agreed to expand an extra runway at Heathrow, and he came in and picked up the mace as well. So
it's the ultimate act of defiance.
It was, for which he was kicked out at the time.
I was going to say that.
For his
I have a feeling, as we look at these pictures in solemn silence, that things have gone a little quicker than perhaps was anticipated, because I think the declaration was supposed to be at noon, and it is now still a minute or so to go to noon. But there was. Did you notice that the Garter, King of Arms, was kind of looking slightly to his left, almost waiting for a signal? But if the time says 12, 12 it shall be.
And it's impressive that we see that with the state opening of Parliament, the rehearsal that goes into that. You're quite right, Alistair. It is to the moment. It has to be done to a certain time. There will be guns that are cannons that are let off. There will be music that is played, and it has to be done to precision timing, of which we are the best in the world.
Can I throw a question out there? And again, we'll all shut up the moment something more important happens there on live television for you, I promise faithfully. But talking about symbolism and things like swords of state and caps of maintenance and of course, most importantly, the mace, as we were talking about. In terms of the bits and bobs